Hey guys, this is Cullen Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we are continuing on right now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days, and the topic of day 21 is tracking software. We're calling this Know Your Opponents Better Than Their Own Moms. Now you might say, you know what, your mom's going to know your joys, your passions, other things that are more important than poker data. But you know what? Nothing is more important than poker data. Okay, I'm just kidding, but poker data is still very important, and we're going to talk about the best ways to use that. So the main things that tracking software are going to do are two distinct functions. One of them is going to be away from the table. So when you're not actually playing, you can see your results, including adjustments for all-in luck, so how you're running when you get it all in. You can look at all hands or specific hands and put them up in replayer. You can see statistics on how you're playing and how your opponents are playing, compare the two. So a lot of things you can do there. And the other thing is you can have this heads-up display. The heads-up display is while you're playing going to show specific data on your opponents and how they are playing. So that's not going to be available on every site. For example, anonymous tables are going to make that much harder, but on a lot of sites you can do this, and anywhere you can, it's going to offer you a significant advantage compared to players who do not take advantage of tracking software. So let's talk about a few different types of tracking software. Poker Tracker 4 is what I personally use. It's a great program, and it's what I'm going to show. Another perennial favorite, Hold'em Manager, classic. And I put two more that I don't actually have much experience with, Hand to Note and Drive HUD, but those are going to be lower cost options. So Poker Tracker and I believe Hold'em Manager have 30-day trials, maybe with slightly limited functionality. And I think Hand to Note has a completely free option. Drive HUD, if you play micro stakes, has a very low cost option. So if you're looking for something less expensive, you can check out those other two. And we'd be very interested to know what lower priced or free tracking software options you guys like the best. So key stats, when you have up your heads up display, there are going to be a few really important stats that you want to have up. One of those is going to be just the number of hands you have up on your opponent. You want a larger sample. But the two that are more interesting are going to be VPIP. So like we talk about in the text, this just means what percent of the time you voluntarily choose to enter the pot. So checking in the big blind doesn't count, limping doesn't count. You have to call or raise pre-flop. And when you compare that to the pre-flop raise percent, that gives you an immediate idea of whether somebody is tight aggressive or loose passive. Okay, so somebody has stats of, let's say, 55/10. Okay, so the 55 is the VPIP. That means they're playing over half of every hand. They're a very loose player. But the pre-flop raise is 10. That means that in 100 hands, they're playing 55 of them, but only taking an aggressive action 10 of those times. So they're a passive player. They're a very loose passive player. And we quickly get an idea of how our opponents play using these stats. And one thing you can do is you can make big adjustments based on your heads-up display. So we've raised ace-jack offsuit from under the gun at a full ring table and faced a 3-bet. Most of the time, my play in that spot would be to fold. Reason for that is because we're not opening a lot of hands from early position. Somebody's showing a lot of strength if they're at all positionally aware when they re-raise you after you've opened under the gun. And ace-jack off doesn't play all that well. So usually what we would do is probably call with ace-jack suited, fold ace-jack offsuit. But if our opponent is playing 65-43, that means that they're VPIP, they're voluntarily entering the pot 65% of the time, aka this person is a maniac. He's also aggressive, given a 43% PFR. So against a maniac, we're not going to fold ace-jack offsuit. Depending on stats, we might move all in, we might call. So we've got different options there, but we're going to be adjusting based on that heads-up display. Now, one thing that is really, really crucial is the hand sample. Okay, so the more hands you have on your opponent, the better the information. And ideally, you want thousands of hands. If you don't have thousands, you want hundreds. If you don't have hundreds, you want at least 50. But even if you have a very small sample, it can be useful if you get pretty extreme data. Okay, so for example, this player who has a 65% VPIP, even if that's the case over a small number of hands, like 15 or 20 hands, they're probably still a maniac. And if you don't have much other information, that can be very useful. So what we're going to do in the remainder of this video is we're going to actually pull up features of the heads-up display and tracking software in my version of Poker Tracker 4 and look at some of these a little bit more directly. So we're going to begin by configuring the heads-up display. Now, depending on what tracking software you use, this might look different for you. So of course, you're going to want to look at the user manual, so to speak, for whatever tracking software that you're using. And often YouTube videos, other online videos are going to be super useful at posting the Cards Chat forums. But this is a guide for doing it in Poker Tracker, and it should be pretty similar in a lot of others. So what we can do here is we have a lot of different possible HUDs. We can toggle between them. And my default tournament HUD is a very simple one. Okay, so we have the player name, and all that's going to do is make sure that we're looking at the correct player, that the positions of where these stats show up is correct. The number of hands we have on them, so here 99 hands, this is the red number, and then the VPIP and PFR like we've talked about. And the last one I have up on my most basic HUD is pre-flop 3-bet. So for example, if it's 7%, that means 7% of times this person is re-raising before the flop. And what we can do is we can change these in a lot of ways. We can, for example, let me click on this one. So what I can do is I can change the prefix. So you see right now when I'm playing, it says VPIP 99. Maybe I don't want it to actually say VPIP. Okay, I can get rid of that and then it just says 99. Or I can make that whatever I want. Another thing that we can do is we can make it apply to specific positions. So here, for example, this is to all positions. But if I wanted to, I could say, well, what is this player's VPIP only in the small blind? I'm not saying I recommend that, but the point is you can customize these very specifically, and you can also easily delete stats or add new ones. So here I can just go to add statistic, and I can look and say, okay, well, how often does this guy bet turn? That's interesting. Or we can do an overall search, and I'll say, how often does this player fold to flop c-bet? I think that's actually going to be f-c-bet. Okay, so this means that you make a continuation bet on the flop. What percent of the time does my opponent fold when I make a flop c-bet? So you can add on new stats like that and make this exactly how you want it to be. The one really important thing I would tell you guys is make sure you don't have up stats just because it seems like they should be useful. You want to make sure that you are actually using the stats you have up on a regular basis because it takes up screen real estate. If you see super complicated HUDs, people have up 100 stats, that's going to make it really tough to focus. So only have up stats that you actually use. And I would recommend starting off with a pretty simple HUD like I have here in this first one-line HUD. So now I've closed that. I want to take a look at stats. And this is not actually my gaming machine, so I don't have too big of a sample on myself here, but we can still take a quick look at that for illustrative purposes. Now, one thing here is I actually have this set to the dollar tab, which means cash. So let's go ahead and switch to tournaments, and this is going to give some stats on tournament play. So this is in my reports, and you can switch around what stats you want to show. So here this means that I have 4,586 tournament hands on this particular database, so pretty small sample. And during those, I've played with this 34 VPIP, 28 PFR. These are going to be much looser stats than my full ring play. My full ring play would be quite a bit tighter than that, but this is going to include some three-handed jackpot, spin and go type formats. We have an overall 3-bet stat, c-bet flop, c-bet turn, and you can add on whatever stats you want to that. So for example, here, rather than search for them, I'm just going to click to toggle that, and let's say here at flop. Okay, so I want to know what percent of the time do I call flop c-bet. So I can add that in and get this stat, which I think is a little bit on the low side. And we can also change around. So let's say, for example, now I want to select a new player, and I'm just going to go ahead and type in a letter at random. I might get somebody that I have very few hands on, But so this guy just have literally one hand on him, which is actually kind of epic. But the point is that I can pull up somebody else and also get stats on them and custom stats, compare my stats to other winners in the game. So anybody that you're interested in, you can pull up stats on both you and that player. Let's go ahead and see if we can find somebody I actually have a few hands on. So I have different people that I've worked with or made content on or just pulled up. But for example, here, this player, we can take a look at him. So we have 66 hands on him. It's not a large sample, but during that sample, he's won some chips. This is someone who's played mainly heads up. So he has pretty loose, good heads up stats. So heads up, you might have this kind of VPIP. There's also some spinning goes in there. And so anyone you're interested in, you could pull up and see their complete stats. So now what we're going to do is, besides pulling up stats, we can do different kinds of reports. So let's go back to my limited sample size here, and we'll do a new report. And I will not save the changes here. And instead of what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do this hand report. So I'll click Finish. And now I get a bunch of hands, including some from one recent session that I have up. And these are going to be all completely unfiltered. So one thing that I can do is any of them, I can right click and I can click to replay hand. And here it pops up. So this is going to be the built-in replayer associated with Poker Tracker. And we can take a look. And so there are options. For example, I can go ahead and display the HUD. And this is going to be a HUD specific to this tournament. So far, this tournament of 45 hands, I've played 41 VPIP, 25 PFR, and 10% 3-bet. I believe this is from a 3-person jackpot style game, and that's why. And we can take a look at the complete hand. So here, pretty standard hand where I open shove and this person folds. Now what we can also do is we can filter to see specific types of hands, and let's go ahead and do that next. So in order to do that, let me go ahead and click on this More Filters, and now I can say, look, I want to see hands that have any specific attributes. For example, I want to see hands where I had Queen Jack suited or offsuit, as well as Jack 10. Okay, so we'll do Add to Filter, Save and Apply Filters. And then, as you can see here, only these hands are going to pop up. This is the whole cards column, so we're only going to see these specific hands that we've selected. Queen Jack suited, Queen Jack off, etc. Or another thing that I can do, let me go ahead and I'll click to clear that. And I'll say, hey, you know what? I want hands where I check the turn, or more complex things. So for example, you can do ones where the pot size is significantly large, or where a certain number of players will dealt into the hand. So you can do even complex filters where you check raise the river in hands that had 8 or 9 players dealt in. So these are going to be very useful if you either, for example, remember, hey, there was a hand from yesterday where I had pocket jacks. So you can do a date filter and a whole cards filter. Or hands where I check raise the river. Like, do I ever check raise the river? Am I ever doing that as a bluff? And you can pull those up. So this is a very nice way to filter through your hands or your opponent's hands. So now I've exited out of that. I want to show this results. And it's kind of unfortunate that I have up my own results. Now, I did give this caveat. I do not normally play in this machine. We have some very small sample here. And embarrassingly enough, I appear to be losing in my tournaments played on this computer. But that's okay. For illustrative purposes, I'm going to go ahead and show this here. And we can put in all of these. So for example, ROI is just going to be what % profit you make in a given game. So right now that's going to show up in purple. And here we have the ITM %, so what % you finish in the money and you cash in that tournament. Blue is how much you've made over the sample, and then you can adjust for luck. Let me go ahead and pull up here. Another thing you can do, by the way, is you can make any filter you want. So here, let's say that we only do turbo games or whatever else you want. So you can filter the results in any way. Now, one thing you can do, let me add this, is you can also import games from other people. So what I did is I imported some of Katie's PokerStars hand histories that she had on her most recent computer. So let's go ahead, and if we pull this up, and we have a larger sample. And so here we take a look at, instead of 100 games, we have a few thousand games. And now this is going to be a good illustration of all of the graphs that we see. So here, for example, this most consistent line is going to be the yellowish one that says that over this sample she finishes ITM in about 20% of tournaments. The purple says ROI is an impressive 70% for these. And then we have total won of about 25,000. And this net adjusted. So what this says is that if you got rid of all-in luck, so for example, if you got all in with pocket aces versus pocket kings, you're supposed to win 80% of the time. And if you actually won, say, 75% of the time, then you've been slightly unlucky. So if you get rid of the effects of all-in luck, that she would have won, instead of 24,800, 22,400. So some of the time you're going to find a bigger difference, between these, showing that you're running either very good or very bad. And so adjusting for all-in luck is a very important aspect of tracking software results. So I think that's going to end our tour of what you can do with tracking software. But again, it's super useful. And I would love to hear what you guys' favorite aspect of HUDs and away from table study is with these programs, and what do you like to use. So for now, we're going to end it here. Thanks very much for watching. This has been Colin Moshman and Katie Dozier for CardsChat.com. Become a winning poker player in 30 days.